This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. And this week, Katherine, Druckman, and I talked to an old friend of mine from the online world, Rob Gesse. He worked at Rackspace for a long time, knows an awful lot about what happens in cloud, what happened to cloud, what happens in marketing around that, how a bunch of companies got together to compete, and not just companies, NASA was included, to compete with Amazon's cloud, Amazon's AWS, by creating OpenStack and how OpenStack came to be. There's a whole story about that. And it all gets tied into marketing as well. Rob knows all about that stuff, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly episode 668, recorded Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. Marketing open source. It's time for the TWiT Audience Survey. The annual survey helps us understand our audience so we can make your listening experience even better. It only takes a few minutes. Go to twit.tv/survey22 to take it. And thanks. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Kolide, that's K-O-L-I-D-E. Get endpoint management that puts the user first. Visit kolide.com/twit, that's KOLIDE.com/twit, to learn more and activate a free 14-day trial today. No credit card required. And by IT Pro TV. Give your team a fun and entertaining IT development platform to level up their skills. Volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/twit. Make sure to mention TWiT30 to your designated IT Pro TV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. And by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics big, small, and strange. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hello again, and a good and happy now to wherever and whenever you are in the world. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly, joined this week by Katherine Druckman herself from, there she is, for Hello. Those of you who are visual. most of our viewers are listeners, and they're thus not impaired. They're liberated from having to see us. So good morning. I guess it's still morning where you are. You're still in Houston? You're in one of your nice rooms. Late. Yeah.
I am. One of my nice rooms. Sort of. The part you can see anyway. Yes, I am.
Yeah, so our guest today is a fellow Texan, I believe, Rob Gesse. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with him at all? I've known him way for a long time, but how about you?
No, I can't say that I am. I guess this will be a fun episode.
There is some Vin here in the sense that he worked for a long time for Rackspace and Linux Journal, which both of us worked for a long time, was one of Rackspace's very, very, very first customers when they were still two guys in a dorm. And so that's been, and I've been a customer there in one way or another ever since. So Linux Journal, I think, has moved on. So since we have a pretty full schedule this morning, I want to go ahead and let all of us know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Kolide. Kolide is a new take on endpoint management that asks the question, how can we get end users more involved? This is in contrast to old school device management tools like MDM, which lock down your employees' devices without considering their needs or even attempting to educate them about the security of their laptop. Kolide is built by like-minded security practitioners who in the past saw just how much MDM was disrupting their end users, often frustrating them so bad that they would throw up their hands and just switch to using their personal laptops without telling anyone. In that scenario, of course, everyone loses. Kolide, on the other hand, is different. Instead of locking down a device, Kolide takes a user-focused approach that communicates security recommendations to your employees directly on Slack. After Kolide is set up, device security turns from a black and white state to a dynamic conversation. This conversation starts with the end users installing the endpoint agent on their own through a guided process that happens right inside their first Slack message. From there, Collide regularly sends employees recommendations when their device is in an insecure state. This can range from simple problems like the screen lock not being set up correctly to hard to solve and nuanced issues like asking people to secure two-factor backup codes sitting in their downloads folder properly. And because it's talking directly to employees, Collide is educating them about the company's policies and how to best keep their devices secure using real tangible examples, not theoretical scenarios. So Collide, cross-platform endpoint management for Linux, Mac, and Windows devices that puts end users first for teams that Slack. Get endpoint management that puts the user first. Visit collide.com/twit to learn more and activate a free 14-day trial today. No credit card required. Visit KOLIDE.com/twit today. Okay, well, welcome to the show. And I really looking forward to this one. Our guest is Rob Gesse. He's describes him as an internet guy before the internet was around, and he's qualified by having run a BBS and finding community way back then. He has a patent for Wi-Fi. He's been a mayor in Hawaii, a startup founder, then a flounder, he says, wrote a book, managed teams, hired Robert Scoble and built a new way to look at a pretty boring industry, which is hosting, though we might want to go more deeply into how all the ways it was boring and maybe not. Became a VP, never went to college, but taught at college. That sounds a lot like me, though I did go. But anyway, welcome, Rob. And for those of you who are watching this, Rob is a still today, and for reasons we're not going to go into because technology and all that. Hey there, Rob.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So you're in San Antonio or Austin or both or neither, or somewhere in Texas, I think.
Well, I'm adjacent to San Antonio. I actually don't live in a city. I'm a real rural Texan. So
a real rural Texan. I think I didn't mention this in there, but you also have a military background, right? I mean, you've lived therefore in many places and done many things.
Yes, I was in the Navy for almost 5 years, and then I was married to the Army for 18 years. So I have lived in some pretty exciting places. I've lived in San Diego, San Francisco, Honolulu, Florida twice. That's just the U.S. We can go overseas. Some more fun places: Hong Kong, Taiwan. Yeah. So just moved around, been around.
And what town were you a mayor of or in?
It's a community called Hau'oli Heights. Very Hawaiian word, means happy. So Happy Heights.
Hau'oli, does that not have heights in it? And is there not a Hawaiian syllable for heights?
There should be. My favorite town in Hawaii, though, is Aiea. There's not a consonant in that AI. I don't even remember, but yeah, it was interesting in Hawaii. My kids were very young and like 3 and 5, and I just couldn't find anybody in Hawaii who would pay me enough to pay for childcare. I was married to a major in the Army at the time, so and we lived on base, so income wasn't as important as my kids. So I basically, as a family, we decided I would be a stay-at-home dad, and I did that for 3 years. And I wrote a lot of shareware during that time, for those who remember shareware. But I was also, like we are all now in pandemic times, I was missing interacting with people. So I decided to run for mayor, and nobody ran against me. So default mayor.
Well, that's a pretty big feather to have in your headdress of experiences. Actually, speaking of the military, I've often thought that we need civilian battle ribbons, like married twice and still living in a trailer, that kind of thing. Anyway, and there are a lot of topics, and you and I actually talked on the phone yesterday about a lot of things, and so let's start with one that's close to our hearts here in the sense that we've talked about it a lot, but mostly from the user's point of view rather than the company point of view, which is open source and business. You work for some big companies. Rackspace is the one I mentioned, and I imagine you might want to focus on that. But how companies have this sort of approach avoidance and then approach to open source in their business and the kind of decisions they need to make around it. And it might be interesting to look at what are the big learnings and mistakes that you see companies making.
Yeah, so let me start out by saying that Rackspace was actually an amazing custodian of open source software. When I was hired as director of software development. At the time we were building a cloud to try to compete with Amazon. Didn't go so well over time, but anyway, my developers were allowed to go to open source conferences, spend time working on open source. And we'll get into this later, but eventually we open sourced some of our core technology in partnership with NASA. It became OpenStack. But so Rackspace is not an offender here. And well, they probably are in some way. I don't know. But I'm talking more about companies that build devices using open source, ship them to consumers, and abandon the open source aspect of the product completely. They don't update any of the open source components that are running on their hardware. And I'll give you an example. I've got a Western Digital RAID device here that I literally have gotten like 20 emails or more from Western Digital in the last couple of months telling me that my device is going offline. They're not going to update it. And basically it's becoming a brick. Now, this is 30 terabytes of my data on this device. Moving 30 terabits of data somewhere else is not easy. And this device is only like 5 years old. How can it be end of life? And why would you end of life a product like this without giving me the ability to manage it myself? I mean, I can understand companies that can no longer, offer, the cloud connectivity or whatever, for whatever business reason. But that's not the case here. The device is basically turning into a brick because they don't want to manage the open source stack that they have raped, they've taken advantage of for all these years. And that just, as a consumer, it just annoys the living crap out of me. And I should mention, after our talk yesterday, I stuck 7 little 3M sticky notes on my computer monitor that have 7 words I can't use on Doc's show.
That George Carlin told us about. Yeah.
I am a sailor. I'm going to be really, really careful, but crap is not one of those words. So it's a replacement word for me. But yeah, so, and that's just one example. We've seen a lot of examples of hardware that is just left to the landfills because either the company disappeared. We've seen a lot of that. Memento, which was an interesting little company, had a very small camera that you clipped on your collar, and every minute it would take a picture. No audio, but it would take a picture. And I think that was a crowdfunded thing. And it seemed to go well for a few years. And it was always interesting to come home from the office and look at my day through, these random images that were snapped. No audio. But when that company folded, I just got another brick. And again, it was due to either an inability or a lack of desire to keep the entire stack updated. And most of that stack was open source.
There's when you're talking about your backup system, I guess it is that with the 30 terabytes, it was actually donated to me. It had been at a university. They abandoned it. It's a network attached storage in NAS. I won't say who makes it. And I'm sure it's got Linux in it somewhere, but it has a proprietary something, or it isn't bricked, but it's remarkably close. Making it useful is really hard and takes a lot of handholding, not from the company, but from somebody else who is familiar with that particular thing and the quirks of it. And I think there's sort of like two kinds of bricking: the kind where you've got a purely proprietary thing where it's no longer maintained. I actually have a scanner here. I have a couple printers that are perfectly good, except that nobody's making the device drivers for them anymore. As the operating systems upgrade, the device drivers don't keep up. And the other kind is what you're talking about, which there actually is open source, but nobody's maintaining that code. And you kind of lose either way, I suppose. There's some hope, I guess, on the open source side.
Well, if they would give us access to the device so that we could manage it ourselves. I mean, that's the key thing here is we're not actually given access to the innards of the device. So I am sure there are enough of these RAID devices out there that the open source community could step up and support them if, the parent company would allow it. But, I also, I was a VP at a public company. I understand legal implications, and who knows how that affected their decision. I just think it's a trend I've seen that I don't like.
So there's Katherine.
Hi.
on this. So Katherine, you know something about OpenStack, right? Which is another topic.
Vaguely, I remember us covering it quite a bit actually when it was first introduced back in, I want to say it was about 2010. We definitely there was a big push to market it. I remember going to, I can't remember. I think it was OSCON and on behalf of Linux Journal, and OpenStack was the topic of conversation, it seemed, or maybe just because I knew some people working on it at the time. But
it is still very alive and well.
Yeah, so that was my next question. I haven't actually followed it. To me, I mean, I work in a slightly higher level, let's say, that's a little bit closer to that's a more lower level technology than I get into. But I wanted to ask you about your perception of how it's evolved and its relevance today versus alternatives, or I don't know. So again, you mentioned something earlier that I thought was kind of funny, is that this was you were building out the Rackspace cloud at the time, and to me now today, all these years later, the cloud almost equals Amazon, right? Like, and I know OpenStack can work with AWS, or maybe it can. It was something that was being worked on, at least, for sure. Anyway, I just wondered if you could comment on that in general.
So let's get back to the history of OpenStack, and as I told Doc, I think there's going to be a future episode on here with somebody who can speak a lot more clearly about OpenStack than I am. But I was there at the inception where, we had customers that were almost forced to build on AWS because there wasn't another cloud platform then. This is, pre-Google Cloud, pre-Azure. And the customers were competitors of Amazon, and they really didn't want to build on Amazon. And when their leadership found out that they were actually spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if not more, on their direct competitors, the leadership wasn't happy. So as a hosting company, they pressed us for a solution. We didn't have an entire solution. We had block storage, which is, remote file storage. But NASA had a compute engine, kind of like the EC2 equivalent, I guess. And NASA approached us and asked if we would work with them and open source our storage technology. They would open source their compute technology. We would combine it together, and thus, a baby was created, and we named it OpenStack. And it's grown tremendously since then. It's used by huge companies like FedEx and Walmart and others. Think of any player who competes with Amazon. They probably don't want to be using Amazon. And they like the idea of a totally, free open source alternative where, they can hire their own developers. They can work on it. They can commit, do commits back to the community, and basically own their entire stack. So I do think OpenStack is alive and well, and I've seen reports of people are spinning up thousands and thousands of containers on OpenStack in a day. So, but again, I'm not the expert on OpenStack. I think the reason I brought up OpenStack with Doc is I think it shows an example of how a large public company can commit a significant amount of resources to the open source community. And, that's what we did in partnership with NASA. And that's not a bad partnership to have, by the way. Be co-branded with NASA was pretty cool.
It looks great in marketing materials, I guess.
Well, I was in marketing at the time, so. So
that's interesting. You mentioned marketing this new platform. It's open source. It's a huge contribution. Lots of other open source projects and companies that work with them ran with it, obviously. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that experience, because again, you were doing this. It's been a while now, right? You were back in the early days of having to still sell the idea of open source, whereas I think, now it's a little bit more ubiquitous. People are less suspect. I remember, when I first started at Linux Journal back, about the time that OpenStack actually, or just maybe a little bit before, but I remember being in meetings where people would still, complain of having to sell the idea of it because people were suspect, because they felt like, there would be inherent vulnerabilities or lack of, intellectual property protection or something like that. And I always go back.
It was more than that. There were internal turf wars where, if you're using something third party, then you're not hiring your own developers. It wasn't built here. Don't trust anything that we didn't build. Look, first off, if something exists and it works, use it. Don't build it. That's just stupid. It's a bad business. So, back, I was at an odd transition period at Rackspace just as open source happened. I was hired as the director of software development for MOSO, which became the Rackspace Cloud. But I only did that job for a year. And for a variety of reasons, the co-founder and then chairman and CEO, Graham Weston, called me and said, "Rob, you do this social media stuff, right?" I had a blog, Twitter account, all that. And I was like, yeah, why? And he goes, well, we need to do more of that. Why don't you come over here and work for me in public relations? So, here I'm a long time, either a developer or a manager of QA, software QA, which I did on Wi-Fi for, almost a decade. And that shift to running social media, creating social media, basically was just me to start with. Ended up, being the VP of social strategy, which sounds uppity. But that included social support. Most of my team was focused on support online. And then social marketing moved into my group, which was interesting and mandated by the fact that the core marketing team just didn't know how to use social media. And they would turn off our customers who are used to us being there and being helpful. And now they're just getting spammed and they didn't like it. So I said, look, you guys don't have access to this anymore. So the only way they could get access to social media was by moving social marketing into my group, which ended up working out pretty well, I think. But getting back on topic on open source, like no hosting company can exist without using open source, period. Rackspace was built on open source software and always remembered that. I think that's a key thing that businesses that actually treat open source with the due deference that they should. Is that the word? Deference? Whatever. They don't forget that. And I bet you Amazon uses open source in their stack somewhere. That probably obfuscate the heck out of it. Yeah.
They use a lot of open source. There have been some controversies actually about that very issue where Amazon uses a popular open source project and doesn't contribute back enough. They say, of course we do. I don't know. Depends on who you ask.
Well, yeah. Who can argue what's enough, right? Enough is, a company like Amazon with all their resources, they should never be in the position where they are being accused of not doing enough, because they should be able to do enough. They've got, I remember when we were building the cloud at Rackspace, I remember a distinct conversation with my boss at that time where I said, look, Amazon has more developers working on cloud than we've got employees. I don't know how we compete with that. And it ended up we couldn't without going open source and building OpenStack. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, this was, again, that was a few years ago, but, now in retrospect, knowing that Jeff Bezos can build himself a rocket to near space, I guess it doesn't seem surprising that they have a lot more resources than your average company.
Look, he can get a multi-100-year-old bridge dismantled to move his yacht, right? Isn't that Jeff Bezos? Never mind.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I'm not bashing Amazon. Amazon has contributed a lot of projects to the open source community, stuff they built internally and then externalized. And of course, they do it when it benefits them. And look, every business should be taking care of business, right? I mean, if you're a CEO at a publicly traded company, you've got a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. So you need to do the right things for your shareholders, which sometimes aren't always the right things for community. I think that's where I am with this Western Digital Rate Array right now. Good thing for the company, bad thing for the consumer.
Well, I want to probe that even more deeply shortly. However, I first have to let everybody know this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. Your IT team needs skills and knowledge to ensure your business is a success. And with IT Pro TV, more than 80% of users who start a video actually finish it. This is 2.5 times greater than average e-learning platforms because IT Pro TV offers training that is fun and entertaining. Give your team the tools they need to make your business thrive. Courses are engaging and binge-worthy, keeping your team interested and invested in learning. The tech industry is evolving, changing rapidly, and your team needs to be trained today. When a new software release or system upgrade or cyber threat faces your business, IT Pro TV offers the training and perspectives of those disruptions within days, if not hours. Why is IT Pro TV right for your business? Well, get all training and certifications for your team done all in one place. IT Pro TV has every vendor and skill you need for your IT team training. They provide Microsoft IT training, Cisco training, Linux training, Apple training, security, cloud, and so much more. Over 5,800 hours worth, ranging from technical skills to compliance to soft skills. You could do so much with an IT Pro TV business plan. Track your team's results, manage your seats, assign unassigned team members, and access monthly usage reports. See metrics like logins, viewing time, tracks completed, and more. Easily manage teams, manage subsets of users or teams by providing them with customized assignments, monitoring progress, and reporting on usage of the platform. Assignments could be full courses and/or individual episodes within courses. Advanced reporting, get immediate insight into your team's viewing patterns and progress over any period of time with visual reports. And don't forget that IT Pro TV has individual plans too. Give your team the IT development platform they need to level up their skills while enjoying the journey. For teams of 2 to 1,000, volume discounts start with 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/twit. That's itpro.tv/twit. Make sure to mention TWiT30 to your designated IT Pro TV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. Okay, so I want to dig a bit more deeply into this cloud thing because I know Werner Vogel's a bit, who's the guy who really thought up Amazon's cloud, came up with AWS, had an academic background actually, and I remember talking to him. We were in France at some gig in France when Amazon was not so important that they didn't go to conferences anymore. And at the time, I remember that the phone companies were saying to me and others and other journalists, "Hey, we have all these facilities. We have clean power. We've already gone digital with the phone system, and we have all this room in our central offices. We can run cloud locally in those places, and we can compete with Amazon on this." And he told me pretty much that, when Amazon's already renting space from those guys, they can't compete. They really can't because they're phone companies. And I want to jump from that to having a lunch or dinner actually with Dirk Elmendorf, who's one of the founders of Rackspace, when right at the end of when he was still involved, and Rackspace was getting into cloud. And he was saying, I had a server sitting in a rack at Rackspace. In fact, it moved to 3 different places before I moved it to the cloud, saying, "Give up, put it in the cloud now. We have a cloud, put it in the cloud. It's much better managed. You don't want to have a remote manage a single server in a rack space." And they were an early leader in that. But then I remember, along came OpenStack, and that was actually a bunch of companies getting together, as you were saying. So I'm wondering about how well all of those now compete with Amazon, because Amazon could have been alone except for OpenStack. They would have really had a monopoly. And I'm wondering about how all those companies kind of co-thought that out together while they're working on it.
Well, I think that was mostly driven by business decisions along the lines of, we're Walmart. What the hell are we doing? Heck, are we doing? Spending money with our largest competitor. How could we do this in-house? And the answer was, it's really hard to do it in-house. I mean, you need a lot of really smart developers. And I think that's about the time that Rackspace realized that, we couldn't build it in-house and compete either. We didn't have the scale. And, the NASA offer came along and it just made a lot of sense. And now there's a lot more to OpenStack than just, compute and storage, just as there's a lot more to AWS than there was back in, 2010. I think it's mostly, financial decisions that I think the decision process was probably something like, even if it costs us more not to deal with Amazon, we will spend more. Because they just didn't want to feed their competition, which, totally makes sense.
So you're talking about your place in the market and having to compete with people with bigger resources. And I wondered if Doc and I like to talk about the evolution of tech marketing, since we were there or at least I was there for the most recent part, and he's been around for a bit more. And I wondered if you could talk about, I don't know, how you see things change, or how things have changed since you first had to introduce, this new cloud platform back in the day. It's a completely different world, right? Back then, I'm assuming you were not relying on the things that people are relying on as much today, in particular, sort of surveillance advertising and that sort of thing. You were reaching an audience in a more personal way, perhaps. It was more, I don't know, trade show focused, that sort of thing. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the way I thought we should market and the way I did market was by, I hired this guy, Robert Scobo, and a videographer, Rocky Barbanica. And people wondered, what the heck are these guys doing going to a hosting company? What are they going to talk about? And look, it was a significant investment. I mean, it was one that, I was speaking to the CEO, the president, the chairman, and Scobo was under contract with some other company then. We had some negotiations to do. But my idea was that we were going to focus on the startup community, and it didn't have to be hosted on Rackspace. That was one of my core tenets. We would talk to anybody. I don't care if you were hosted on Amazon. Now, if you were hosted on Rackspace, we would probably bring that up during the interview. But we did, I think we averaged 1,400 videos a year for 5 years. That's a ton of content. And it's got the Rackspace logo all over it. So I call it self-branding. We're not shoving Rackspace down your throat, but there it is for you to see. Just open your eyes. It's there. And I think it also, that's right about the time that Rackspace had their initial IPO. I think as far as building visibility, it was a great, PR/marketing/branding, whatever move. And, I'm patting myself on the back, I know, but, and the reason I'm doing it is because it was so unique. For a company to go look, we're based out of San Antonio. We hired 2 guys out of the Bay Area to be the face in a lot of ways of the company. It was strange, and a lot of internal, people in marketing and PR and legal and other places thought it was very strange as well. So, I won't pretend that it got universal acceptance ever, but it was accepted internally more and more, especially when, the website we built to host our videos was getting significantly more traffic than Rackspace.com was. So people understood it. It made sense. It worked. So I like marketing to people. I think that's why I built social media the way I did. Let's focus on being the most helpful brand on social media. And, I think in 2010, something like that, we were rated the 8th quickest responding brand on social media, which is, pretty cool. I think at that point we had 300,000 customers and over 100,000 Twitter followers, and in internal conversations, no other marketing, messaging, newsletters, any of that had that kind of reach, which of course is why marketing wanted to use our social platforms because we established that reach. But we did that by doing what Rackspace was built on, with fanatical support. We're going to be there for you. And look, I don't want to get into how the company's changed. It has. My daughter still works there. Still love the company, but it's a decade, almost. How long is it since I worked there? 7 years, I guess. And the company grew up. Period. That's the way I look at it.
There's a now again. I mean, my thoughts on this may be biased by my own experience with Rackspace, because I was with them pretty one way or another from the very beginning. But I know the founders personally, or at least 2 of them, and they're really good guys, and they established. I think the marketing, especially with the social stuff you did, was inherently personal, and it was. And there's actually a tweet that you had back in. And thank you, Ant, for finding it. Your marketing efforts should not be spent telling your story to your customers. You should let your customers tell their stories about you. That really was a powerful thing, and it is personal. And the service was just outstanding. They talked about their fanatic customer service. Rackspace did. I think it's not fanatic anymore, but I don't want to go into that. I just think companies change, and a question I have for you.
I think they know it's not.
Go ahead.
I think they know it's not. I think they know it's not fanatical anymore because they dropped that tagline. So
yeah.
It's a different tagline. But like I said, the company grew up, and they're serving much larger businesses than on average than they were back when I started in 2008. In 2008, I think, a monthly recurring revenue customer that was spending $10,000 was a big customer. Now we've got customers they've got customers spending millions of dollars a month. So, it's a different company. But, I think the Racker ethos is still there. We chose to call ourselves Rackers. And when legal trademarked that and told us that we couldn't use it in our social media profiles anymore, I raised a stink and got them to relent on that. That's our self-chosen name. You don't take that from us. So I was in like a really interesting position at Rackspace. I was hired by the chairman, co-founder, and CEO. And the co-founders, the two who were still there at the time. So, I was allowed to make a little bit more noise than some other people, much to the chagrin of a lot of people, I think. But my goal was always to help the customer, focus on the customer. And, one of the best emails I ever got was from the then president of the company named Lou Mormon, who said, "Rob, you are our moral compass." And I loved that email so much, because by morals, he didn't mean anything about religion, right? He was talking about, I'm holding us true to Rackspace values, to our core values. And I love that.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point, which is that, some companies, when they succeed, become more from B2C companies to B2B companies. And that's almost like a holy grail. And it's actually, in some ways, even though you've got much more responsibility to multi-million-dollar spends coming from single sources than you would have when you've got lots of small spends from lots of small customers and many more of them. But there's something gets lost in that. And this is not a knock on Rackspace in particular. I think it's actually true across business right now. And I was just involved in a conversation with somebody about a big company, I'll leave them nameless, also known for their customer support, that just simply could not successfully ship a product to them. And every time this person interacted with the customer support person, afterwards you get this survey saying, how did that person do? When in fact it was the system behind it that was busy failing. And that's a B2B system. They're buying these systems from Salesforce. I don't want to knock Salesforce. Salesforce is probably doing a good job with that, but and Oracle and SAP and these other big companies. But there's this whole B2B world that's going on, and we as customers, as individuals, don't see it. And I'm actually where I want to go with this, and I'm not sure you can take us there, but I'd be interested if you could try, is what's the open source approach to that? Is there an open source approach to that that's not just run your own damn server in your own basement and, rather than in somebody's cloud or having a dependency on big companies? Because I think there's if not a middle ground, there may be a new solution that wants to happen there.
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting if a entirely open source hosting company popped up? Everything we do is built on open source. We're going to show you all of our internals, from our source code to how our billing mechanisms work. That would be interesting. But look, even as companies change and grow, the core technology that runs the data centers is still running a ton of open source software. So internally, these companies have to have experts on those particular pieces of open source. Otherwise, if one, I won't say which one, but if one piece of open source software failed, it could take down a data center. And we all know what it looks like. I remember a TechCrunch article about Rackspace, who tripped over the power cord. And then the next line was, if all your favorite websites seem to be offline, it's because they are. Rackspace has an outage. And man, that is a multi-million-dollar event, first off. Plus, the brand damage, the trust damage is so hard to recover from. So why would these companies not be hiring, internalizing, evangelizing, and promoting all these employees that they've got internally that are working on these open source projects? Why not celebrate them instead of just trying to hide the fact that your entire freaking box depends on an open source stack. Of course it does. Every box does. I don't know if I addressed your question.
No, you did. And I think that it actually gets back to something you brought up very early on, which is what you might call abandonware, because some things do get abandoned and not picked up, and there are great dependencies on them. And I don't know if you want to visit that topic again, but we might want to look at, what has changed in the open source community, where, when Katherine and I were early in it, and you too, I'm sure, there was a sense of a moral imperative behind it. We're doing, what I'm writing here is not just for my employer, it's for the world. And I like that dependency, and I like that responsibility too. I've kind of got this Lego, I'm working for this company, and I've got this set of Lego blocks that are containers and things like that. And I'm working on that. And I'm kind of taking open source for granted, because there are these parts of the company that I work for that are depending on it, but there's no sense of downware, or there's less sense, I guess, of downward toward the base appreciation for the need to have people maintaining stuff that without necessarily being paid. and so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that and where things have gone over the last few years on that.
Well, I think it's been longer than the last 2 years, but I think, things like GitHub have certainly changed open source a lot. More centralized. Everybody kind of knows where to go to find open source. And not that, GitHub's the only place. I'm not suggesting that, but 20 years ago, you basically needed to connect with the core maintainer of that open source project if you wanted access or wanted to learn more or share more or whatever. So I think the community has adjusted in a really, really amazing way. And of course, all the tools that allow us to, drop into a Discord or a Slack room or whatever and have conversations and ask questions is so much more powerful than, doing a Google search or posting on a forum somewhere and waiting, maybe a week, hoping somebody's gonna reply to you. So I think that's a big part of a positive shift. But also, when you're talking about how large companies use open source, and even if they've got their own internal maintainers that are contributing back, one little change can affect so much in the core of the operations of something like a data center or a cloud computing environment that they really, really need to be tested to the max. And, this is the old QA guy in me who's always preaching that, for every developer you hire, you should hire at least 2 QA people, because new code doesn't matter if it's bad code. And you can save yourself a lot of heartache. And look, I was doing software quality assurance when we were embedding firmware into a chip, right? Not easy to, it's not a Windows update type thing if you screwed it up. In fact, in some cases, the only way to fix it was, make new chips with new code. And that's outrageously expensive. But, again, that draws me back to this whole rate thing where they don't need a new chip. They just need to give me access to the device. Me and an army of other people. Let us take it off your hands.
So we're getting toward the end of the show, and I have to take a break now to tell you this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Compiler. an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics, big, small, and strange. Compiler comes to you from the makers of Command Line Heroes, another of our sponsors, and is hosted by Angela Andrews and Brent Simoneau. Technology can be big, bold, bizarre, and complicated. Compiler unravels industry topics, trends, and the things you've always wanted to know about tech through interviews with the people who know it best. On their show, you'll hear a chorus of perspectives from the diverse communities behind the code. Compiler brings together a curious team of red hatters to tackle big questions in tech, like what is technical debt? What are tech hiring managers actually looking for? And do you have to know how to code to get started in open source? Episode 2 covers what can video games teach us about edge computing. The internet is a patchwork of international agreements and varying infrastructure, but there's something coming to change the ways that we connect. In this episode of Compiler, hosts explore what edge computing could mean for people who enjoy video games and what this form of entertainment could teach us about the technology. Episode 9 is titled, How Are Tech Hubs Changing? Traditionally, if someone wanted a career in tech, they had to make the move to a tech hub, a city packed with startups and talent, but things are starting to change. The hosts of Compiler speak to a few of the change makers who are thinking outside the physical and social dimensions we've come to associate with innovation. And I've listened to some of these. They're all really good. Got to let you know. Learn about Compiler at red.ht/twit. That's red.ht/twit. New episodes are out now. Go and download them at any time and be sure to check back for new shows. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll also include a link on this episode's show page. My thanks to Compiler for their support. Okay, so we're down toward the end of the show now, Robin. We always close with 4 questions, and I think the first one could take us some time, and it's a potentially good one, which is, are there any things we haven't asked so far that you'd like to cover that are in your mind?
Not really, but you did bring up something earlier in passing that I think needs more than an in-passing comment, where you said, how do we expect people to work on this software basically for free? And I just want to tell you that most of the things I've done in my life that I'm most proud of and feel the best about are things that I've done that were, quote unquote, free. I wasn't getting paid to do them. I was not financially anyway. I was getting paid in a totally different way. And that's what I love about the open source community. We have so many people involved who are not there for the fame, money, and glory. They just want to be helpful. And, I own the @Be Helpful Twitter handle. Be helpful was my mantra at Rackspace. Everything we did on social marketing had to be helpful. And I just think the open source community is naturally built that way, which is one of the reasons I love the community.
There's that reminds me of something that, one of the best lessons I got from my mother, who was also a teacher, grew up in homesteading country in rural North Dakota. And she taught that you always have 2 choices. You can help or you can hurt. And it's almost like a charge discharge thing. Are you helping or not? And I think that matters. I think you've hit on something really important there. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's why we have listeners here. So all you helpful people. We have 3 more brief questions. One is, have you got anything to say about blockchain? It's one of our control questions.
I will admit I don't understand it. With that admission, almost anything else I say becomes, stupid.
It's like, I think I'm dealing with it in one way or another on a journalistic side almost every day. But yeah, it's and when there are that many crypto ads on the Super Bowl, wow, it's moved along.
And I still read Tech Meme. I don't know how many people still read Tech Meme. I do.
Yeah, they do.
Everyday page for me. And every day it seems there's an article on there that some wallet, some crypto wallet, or somebody's getting ripped off. And, let's not even get into NFTs. I call them nothing freaking there, freaking being the Doc Searls. So yeah, look, I don't get it. I don't want to sound even more ignorant about it. So what's the next question?
Well, the last two are pretty simple. They are, what's your favorite text editor and scripting language? And I know you were a programmer, which I'm still not. So you probably have some answer to that.
I'm definitely dating myself. I absolutely loved Newton Script for the Apple Newton.
Wow.
We were buying, this is before Wi-Fi existed. We had wireless devices that could talk to each other, but it wasn't using, the 802.11 protocol. But I was the Newton programmer, and we would take Newtons, which we bought directly from Apple, rip the case off, build our own cases. We'd put in a CDMA modem, so you'd have a cell phone. We'd put in Wi-Fi. We'd put in backlighting, and we'd put in a much larger battery. And these are being used by, typically like telephone linemen, where they could pull up schematics when they were in a tunnel and stuff. But I got to write all the code that ran on the Newton, and I loved it. And it's the only negative, well, not the only, but one of the only negative things I can say about Steve Jobs is I really did not like it when he killed the Newton. He brought it back with the iPhone.
Yeah, he did. That's would we have had the iPhone if the Newton succeeded? That's an interesting question too, I suppose. But I think it didn't succeed because he wasn't really running this scene at the time.
He didn't build it. He didn't build it. That's why he didn't keep it, right? That was one of Steve's idiosyncrasies. Is he liked investing in things that he was involved in from the beginning.
Yeah, I think it was killed by Doonesbury, which had a really, really funny strip on somebody talking to the Newton and having it completely misunderstand what they were saying. Well, this has been great. We've got our hour. This has been wonderful. So thanks a lot for being on the show, Rob. This has been great.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So, Katherine, do we?
Yeah.
That was good. I've known and followed Rob for many years, and it was great to be able to talk to him on the show.
That was an interesting perspective on open source contribution. I think that's something that's it's changed a bit. How people perceive that and the idea of getting paid fairly and compensated for open source is something that has evolved, I think, since I think we got started and talking about it, and certainly since I did. So I don't know. That's always an interesting conversation. Sort of take the pulse of what people accept today versus 10 or more years ago.
Well, something that Rob and I talked about on the phone yesterday was that programmers are paid, especially the best of them. There's a premium on them now. There's a huge demand for programmers now, and much more than there was early on, and that's changed things too. So, and that's when we have him back for another show, maybe we could go into that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's there are a lot of people getting paid very well by companies who contribute back to open source projects. And I think that's a great thing. And I think it's also great when people can make a living individually, while contributing to open source projects. And I think that's something that more businesses and individuals should foster.
Well, this is, I think having more people programming all the time can only have, especially in open source, it can only have good results.
Eventually something's going to work.
Yeah, well, it kind of, I was thinking an analogy is, everybody should know how to drive a stick, a stick shift, but there are fewer and fewer of those in the world, but everybody has a keyboard and a computing device, so it's a little different. And knowing QWERTY alone it's a great start. Anyway, we're pretty far into this, so I think we'll need to, tell you that next week, and I have to look at the schedule real quick, see who we have next week. I don't even know. Let's see. I don't have time to look it up. Oh, geez. Mad Dog will be back. John Mad Dog Hall. Great authority on Linux. Good friend from way back, has been on the show several times. He can ground us. He always knows so much. So next week, Mad Dog will be with us. Until then, thanks. Oh, yeah. And Katherine, anything to plug before we're off the show? I know.
Sure. I mean, you can always find us at Reality 2Cast. Use Drupal. Keep it updated.
Reality 2.0 with a picture of you looking like you do now and a picture of me when I look like when I still had hair. Excellent. Yeah, so that's Reality 2Cast. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
The world is changing rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that it's hard to keep up. That's why Micah Sargent and I, Jason Howell, talk with the people making and breaking the tech news on Tech News Weekly every Thursday. They know these stories better than anyone, so why not get them to talk about it in their own words? Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and you won't miss a beat every Thursday at twit.tv.